Too Much Information is a production of iHeart.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your two ones and zeros of wonderfully zany facts. I'm Alex Heigl.
Your bent spoons of banality?
That's not bad.
Is that okay? And I'm Jordan Runtagh.
And we know Kung Fu. That's not true.
Well, you do, don't you?
I know Taekwondo.
Oh, okay.
And some Muay Thai. But I do not know Kung Fu. Other than what I've seen in Jackie Chan movies. Which is probably a lot.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable saying I've seen Legend of Drunken Master enough times that I could drunken box someone. And have. Jordan, I'm just kidding. I've never been in a fight. Don't get scared, advertisers. I desperately need money. Jordan, today we are here to talk about one of the most iconic films of the past quarter century, a movie that flawlessly blends old school martial arts and action movie fundamentals with a new understanding of how the growing digital world affected us all. That is right, my friend. We are talking Friends, listeners, Romans, and so forth. That's right. We are talking about The Matrix. Perfect film. No notes. Episode over. What can you say? When this came out, I was primed to think it was the coolest thing ever, and I was right, and I have not been proved otherwise. So, I mean, it's a really researching this for this episode made me realize how finely balanced on a knife edge of production this whole thing was.
It could have gone so badly.
Any of their alternate castings, like if the technology had looked a little bit shittier, if the people hadn't been able to submit to 4 months of training to learn Kung Fu, it all could have sucked so hard. And instead we got a masterpiece, and we got a masterpiece that is so timeless and yet timely because it came out in 1999. We still had modems. Modems are in this movie. But the national interest / panic over Y2K was building, and people were already starting to theorize about how the internet was going to change all of our lives. Cough for the worse. Jordan, I'm guessing though that black leather, gunfights, and large kicks were not exactly your wheelhouse as a preteen, though.
That part of it was not, but I also had a very seldom discussed flirtation with computers and technology when I was a kid. My mom was a computer programmer, and so we were probably one of the first houses in the neighborhood that had the internet and, Windows 95 and all the cutting edge technology stuff. And I remember being very skeptical of the internet because I was such a, just give me books, give me big stacks of books. That's what I want. And I remember my mom sold it to me by saying, Jordan, you can look up the entire passenger manifest of the Titanic. And it only takes 2 minutes to download a word page.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? There's a whole world out there. And so that was I was, for somebody who's as into old timey things, I have a lava lamp and a record player next to me. I was surprisingly an early adapter to the internet. And, the characters in media that I identified with as a child, they weren't usually the kids that went out on the adventure. They were usually the nerdy ones who stayed home by the computer and relayed.
Guy in the chair.
Yeah, exactly. Guy in the chair with the headset mic or walkie-talkie, relaying crucial information from the computer screen. That was who I always identified with. Penny from Inspector Gadget was one of these figures, and the River Phoenix character in my beloved Explorers movie. And I romanticized inventors. I love Doc from Back to the Future and the Rick Moranis character Wayne Zielinski from the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movies. And one of my favorite movies was Short Circuit, about a guy who builds robots. So yeah, despite my penchant for all things retro, I was into tech stuff and the whole kind of hacker, not really the aesthetic, but just that sort of techno-punk vibe. I like that, at least before The Matrix birthed a whole subgenre of hacker wannabe people. And there were a lot of kids at my school who got long trench coats from the Salvation Army in the wake of this movie coming out and did their interpretation of kung fu moves in the courtyard at lunch. So, I mean, it's what you told me about Van Halen. I do not begrudge this movie their bastard sons, as unpleasant as they could be. But yeah, this movie whips. I mean, it's The Matrix. And as you say, the timing of it was perfect because it seemed to come at this point at the dawn of the new millennium when the internet was taking off. Singularity seemed to be near, and the line between reality and computers seemed to be blurring. And now we are at a point when we literally don't know what's real. So that's cool. And we describe our chosen reality as being pilled, which is a phrase taken directly from this movie, as we'll touch on.
Yeah.
So prescient in a terrifying way.
Yeah, deeply. I mean, it's funny to me. You're not like a Wachowskis fan. Like, you don't know their other stuff, I gather.
Not really, no. In fact, I
Yeah.
don't know. I maybe have seen the first Matrix sequel. I don't think I've seen the third, and I've definitely not seen the fourth, which I kind of forgot existed until today.
Yeah, I hate that fourth movie, and I've gotten in so many arguments about it online. But they remain fascinating to me because they just love to use an analogy from a sport I barely understand. They're always swinging for the fences every time they're at the plate, because
Yeah.
they just took their Matrix money and poured it into stuff like V for Vendetta from the famously difficult to adapt Alan Moore. They did a Speed Racer film that people still go to bat for, and then they did these two big clunky sci-fi things that lost a lot of money, like Cloud Atlas and Jupiter Ascending. And then they made a Netflix series that didn't do well, and it's just like I applaud their vigor and in making movies that do not seem to connect the same way that this one has. God love them.
It's like good James Cameron. It's like not evil James Cameron.
I mean, it's James Cameron I don't know. I don't know if I can cotton that comparison. It's James Cameron if he didn't get results.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
Anyway, so from the grueling training that Keanu and most of the rest of the cast underwent to become Neo and the rest, to the new technology the production innovated to build the film's world, to the equally depressing and inspiring shadow the film casts 25 years later, here's everything you didn't know about The Matrix. The Wachowskis, Lily and Lana, were born in Chicago, where high school classmates remember them as Dungeons and Dragons players who were into theater and their magnet school's TV program.
Which is just such a spot-on origin story. Quick spotlight on the funniest thing I've ever done. As far as my girlfriend was concerned, at least. We were walking by a big facility with a sign out front that said Magnet School, and as soon as I spotted it, I said, "Oh no!" and I threw myself against the sign as if I was being drawn by a magnet. Shout out to my comedy stylings. Proceed.
Don't ever interrupt me again with something like that. After graduating high school, Lana went to Bard College in New York State, and Lily attempted... I'm just watching you delete one of your sides as I read that. After graduating high school, Lana went to Bard College, New York State, and Lily attended Emerson in Boston, but they each dropped out before graduating. And I understand, Jordan, that you applied to both of those schools. Or got in?
I did, yes. I have no amusing anecdotes about that.
Anyway, the Wachowskis went on to run a house painting and construction business in Chicago, which sounds like the setup to a wonderful sitcom that I would currently watch.
Or a mob cover.
Well, yeah, that's true. They also wrote for Marvel's Razorline, which was a short-lived imprint based on concepts created by horror icon Clive Barker that I just learned about for this episode, which is wild considering I'm a Clive Barker fan. Their character was the hilarious named Dex Mungo, the Ecto Kid, who was the son of a human woman and a male ghost, and I don't know how that was ever explained, who, via his parentage, can see into the world of the dead. And you can easily see the seeds of the Matrix in this comic because the Ecto Kid, Dex, gains the ability to travel freely in the dimension of the dead by leaving his physical world behind, much like Neo. Or just astral projecting as a concept. Also, after the comic wrapped, Steve Scroce, I think is how you pronounce that, was one of the co-creators, and he would draw the 600-page, fully fleshed out storyboard / comic book that essentially got the movie greenlit. So that's all cool.
This is a crucial point for our listeners. Dex Mungo, not to be confused with Mungo Jerry.
Who's still alive.
Who's still alive, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Of In the Summertime fame.
Tune in next time for more Mungo Jerry updates.
Ding.
Is Mungo something in Britain that I don't... Is it like a gross thing?
It sounds like a slur, but it to my knowledge, no.
Anyway, but in a way, The Matrix owes its genesis to a completely different medium and the godfather of cheapo American cinema, one Mr. Roger Corman.
Who's also still alive, yeah.
Roger Corman is also still alive.
Shout out to people who are still alive.
Yeah, it's hard these days. The Wachowskis read a copy of Corman's book, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. And they were suitably inspired to write a script called Carnivore about wealthy people being eaten by cannibals, which would have fit in great in the past couple of years of Hollywood. I don't know why they didn't make that. This has sadly been never brought to the screen, although George A. Romero supposedly at one point expressed interest in it. But the Carnivore script did one thing, which was catch the eye of Warner Brothers, who bought a script from the Wachowskis called Assassins in 1995, and crucially, options for 2 more. Lily Wachowski told BuzzFeed in 2015, the first cash payment that we got on Assassins was from Mel Gibson. He had read the script, and he was like, where did this come from? We were like, look, we have to make a decision because we had an offer from DDLC, which is Dino De Laurentiis' company. Then our agent told Mel's company that, look, these 2 are super poor. They're calling from a gas station phone right now. So Mel Gibson wrote us a check for like $1,000 each to wait 24 hours or something like that. We were like, $1,000. Yes, we're rich. And then Mel was like, no. Gibson opted to make Braveheart instead, which was probably a good decision. Director Richard Donner of Superman and Goonies fame eventually snapped up the script for Assassins with several big names like Dino De Laurentiis and Joel Silver producing, and it wound up starring Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas. Perhaps needless to say for anyone with any understanding of how Hollywood works, though, this was not an ideal environment for 2 first-time screenwriters. Richard Donner ordered the Wachowski script almost completely rewritten by Brian Heigl, who, among other things, wrote L.A. Confidential and Mystic River, so not a bad call, honestly. But the Wachowskis hated it enough to try and get their names taken off the script, and they failed. Over the WGA, I'm pretty sure. They were referring to it for a long time as Our Abortion, which is not great. But they did say that the experience convinced them that they would never survive in the world of Hollywood as writers alone. They had to direct. So the Wachowskis had completed a draft of The Matrix. They've been working on this thing on and off since the early 90s when they were comic book writers, but they had a draft ready to show as early as 1995, and they showed it to Joel Silver, producer extraordinaire. Joel Silver. What else has he done? Like everything, right?
He was in.
I shouldn't have to explain this.
He was in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I think he was a producer for it, and he had a bit part in it too.
Yeah, Lost Boys. I think a lot of the Batman stuff. Who may be best known for making billions of dollars with stuff like 48 Hours, Streets of Fire, the Lethal Weapon franchise, the first 2 films of Die Hard franchise, the first 2 films of the Predator series, and the entirety of the Matrix franchise, as well as I am just now reading creating the rules along with 2 other guys for what would become the sport Ultimate Frisbee.
You're kidding me.
I am not kidding you. That is the lead graph on his Wikipedia page, which I have just now learned. Anyway, the minute I started reading the script for The Matrix, I wanted to see it. But then the Wachowskis said, and we want to direct it. That was going to be tough, Silver told Wired in 2003. So he decided to throw them into the director's chair for another one of the scripts that got optioned, but a much lower stakes one, a noirish thriller called Bound. Starring Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon and Joey Pantoliano. The film did well with critics, and the LGBTQ romance at the center of its plot gained a cult following that persists to this day, something that supposedly Dino De Laurentiis, of all people, lobbied to change. Lana Wachowski, however, shot down the popular telling of Bound as audition piece for The Matrix years later, telling BuzzFeed, Joel made that up. Probably one of the few people in Hollywood rich enough to say that about Joel Silver.
Yeah.
Filmed over 38 days on a $6 million budget, Bound failed to become a runaway hit, but garnered enough critical praise, especially for Tilly and Gershon's performances, that the Wachowskis were in a good position to get the green light for The Matrix. A funny coincidence that helped after the success of Bound was that Warner Brothers had just watched its own erotic revenge thriller, an expensive remake of the 50s French film Diabolique, flop. The fabulously named Lorenzo di Bonaventura, who was then a development executive at Warner Brothers, told Wired that the company's co-chairman Terry Semel saw Bound and exclaimed, God damn it, this thing probably cost a fraction of our picture, and it's so much more interesting.
Lorenzo di Bonaventura, didn't he develop the rules for pickleball?
Just want to give that time to land. And there we go. Hold for applause.
Stretch.
Vamp.
Even so, the Wachowskis were fighting an uphill battle for The Matrix, an action movie that featured multiple philosophical threads, a combination of religious imagery from both the East and the West, all set in a dystopian future and dotted with cyberpunk jargon. All this taken together did not make for the most executive-pleasing script. Anna Wachowski told BuzzFeed, "Every single person in town rejected it." Their manager, Lawrence Mattis, recalled to The New Yorker, "When I first read The Matrix, I called them all excited because they'd written a script about Descartes, the philosopher René Descartes. But then everyone read the script and passed. Nobody got it. To this day, I think Warner Brothers bought it half out of the relationship with them and half because they thought something was there." The Wachowskis clinched it by hiring Jeff Darrow, who created the well-known comic book Hard Boiled, and the aforementioned Steve Scroce, their old buddy from their Marvel comic days, who made a 300-page scene-by-scene comic book based on their script, which I imagine was basically like an elaborate storyboard. They laid this out for Warner Brothers co-chairman Terry Semel and Bob Daly. Producer Joel Silver told the New York Times, "This was virtually identical to the movie. But even so, this presentation was, quote, an unusual show." The aforementioned, incredibly named Lorenzo Di Bonaventura told Wired, "One of the Wachowskis was explaining the story, and the other was making sound effect noises," which is adorable. Awesome. I love that. All during the presentation. Imagine that being your role when you're in a high-level meeting at Warner Brothers. All right, make the pew-pew sounds. All right.
Oh, yeah.
All right, when we do the bullet scene, when we do the stuff. Yeah. So, imagine like practicing that at home before going in.
I'm sure they did.
Oh,
They're just the most
did.
delightful nerds, you know?
Oh, I love that so much. Asked if the company was going to make money on The Matrix, Di Bonaventura remembered, "I thought for half a second and said, we're not going to lose any money," which is a beautiful way to skirt the issue. Again, the Wachowskis caught the studio at a good or bad time, depending on how you look at it. The Matrix budget was put around $60 million, which at the time, back in 1990, what would that have been? 7, 8, was a big investment. Probably closer to $100,000 today. But it was far less than what the company had spent on their flop Batman and Robin, which you are a huge Batman head, is widely considered to be the nadir of the franchise, and basically the reason the studio started from the ground up with the Christopher Nolan films.
And still has its weird defenders online, unfortunately. Man, the craziest thing about Twitter, RIP or whatever, is just that, like, no matter what piece of movie is out there, you will find people ready to go to bat for it in your mentions.
You're not one of them, right?
To go to bat for Batman and Robin?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I think I've told this story many, many times, but that was one of the movies that first educated me to the concept that movies could be bad. I previously thought that movies had to be good because they got made.
You know what? That makes a lot of sense. And I bet you there's still a lot of people out there thinking it was went through enough very smart people and cost enough money that surely, enough effort went into it to make it a certain level. But no, you're absolutely right. Executive Di Bonaventura said sequels were faltering and a lot of genres were dying. Action comedy movies, buddy cop movies. We knew we needed to do something different. So The Matrix was greenlit on the condition that it would shoot in Australia, where $60 million would go a lot further. This is as good a time as any to get into what the script, which apparently went through somewhere between 11 and 14 rewrites, entailed. Lily Wachowski told the New York Times, "The script was a synthesis of ideas that sort of came together at a moment when we were interested in a lot of things, making mythology relevant in a modern context, relating quantum physics to Zen Buddhism, and investigating your own life. We started out thinking of this as a comic book. We filled notebook after notebook with ideas. Essentially, that's where the script came from." First bong rip idea? Second bong rip idea?
Many bong rip ideas.
Yeah, I say that with love.
I mean, it is actually really fascinating to trace all the stuff that goes into the Matrix and just see how
dense
they pulled together this genius mood board from like so many different places, and you can when you break art, any kind of work of art down into its kind of constituent elements, like there's a book of interviews with Tom Waits that I used to have that he talks about like the 5 or 10 records that like define his shtick. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's 100% totally it. And it is just amazing how much stuff. I mean, even if you just think of the Wachowskis as like incredible magpies and who are able to sort of synthesize a bunch of stuff into their own vision, that's still an incredible feat.
Yeah. And then also, it's what our buddy Billy Joel said when people were talking about, dissecting the structures and lyrics of Piano Man. Maybe it's best not to dissect things while it's still alive. I like that. I like that a lot. But both the Wachowskis had read The Odyssey multiple times, along with groundbreaking cyberpunk works by guys like William Gibson and Philip K. Dick.
Dude, the fun, I just have to do this as an aside. The funniest thing, I haven't been able to substantiate this because like I'm not a huge William Gibson fan, but I have read his big one, which the name escapes me actually. This is embarrassing. Hang on.
Do you like Philip K. Dick? Are you a dickhead?
Neuromancer. I do like Philip K. Dick because I like Philip K. Dick because he gobbled speed like Pez's while he was writing all of his stuff. And so every one of his books is like this semi-genius nugget of an idea that is just filtered through so many layers of like methamphetamine-addled paranoia. Yeah, William Gibson. I have not read further than Neuromancer, which is sort of like his, all bullet points, like big book that's very influenced and basically coined the term, cyberpunk and all this stuff. But the funniest thing that I know about him comes from a Tumblr post that I have not been able to substantiate, which was basically that when Gibson was dodging the draft and went to Canada in the late 60s, he was just bumming around Canada with the nascent hippie scenes there. And he managed a head shop, apparently. And then when he went to write all of his novels and stuff, he took their the slang that he got there and basically built that into this worldview. So this person is like, yeah, my parents were hippies in Canada around that time, and so I have aunts in their 60s who sound like they're talking out of like Shadowrun or Neuromancer. He says, or in a different way, all of your favorite hacker icons in cyberpunk literature talk like my old aunts.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of their cinematic influences, the Wachowskis grew up watching a canonical cross-section of 20th century film icons like Stanley Kubrick, John Huston, Billy Wilder, which that's a surprising one to me, Ridley Scott, George Lucas.
I mean, when anyone says Billy Wilder, don't they just mean we've seen Sunset Boulevard a lot?
I guess to me, I always think of like Some Like It Hot in The Apartment and some of the more like later era comedy stuff. I think he did Double Indemnity too, I think, which is a great film noir. So I get, you know what? You're right. Withdrawn. Snide aside, withdrawn. And they also were big fans of Jean-Luc Godard's 1965 French sci-fi noir Alphaville. And of course, everyone loves Fritz Lang's Metropolis. That was a big influence on David Bowie too. No, Metropolis is great. Along with anime classics like Ghost in the Shell, which is about cybernetically enhanced humans who are, among other things, able to extend their consciousness into a technological network. And then they also were into Hong Kong action flicks by people you admire, guys like John Woo. But central to their Matrix script was Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which stars a group of people chained in a cave watching the shadows projected on the cave wall by a fire lit behind them. They perceive the shadows as reality, but do not know their true form. And there are also religious elements, too, as we touched on earlier, drawing from Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Judaism, and Christianity. All of this has become fertile ground for decades of analysis. To give just one example, Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek has written about the Matrix trilogy and titled his book on the response to 9/11, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, which is a quotation from the movie, which is in turn an allusion to a line from Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation.
So, with all that secured, production moved on to the casting stage. It has become alternate casting canon, I guess, or lore that Will Smith turned down the role of Neo to make Wild Wild West. because what was supposedly concerned about the film's ambitious special effects, though Smith has later said that he wasn't, quote, mature enough as an actor at the time, and that he, quote, would have messed it up, which is objectively correct. Nick Cage also turned down the part because of supposed family obligations. This would have been right after he'd made Face Off, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he just worked with John Woo. Maybe he didn't want to do another I Have a Gun in Each Hand movie.
What did he do?
I think next he did Bringing Out the Dead or City of Angels.
Okay. City of Angels, all out.
You gotta watch the Wim Wenders one that has Nick Cave in it.
Yeah.
Oh no. He had just done Leaving Las Vegas.
Oh,
One of the most depressing movies of all time in 95. 96 he did The Rock. 97 he did Con Air. Also in 97 he did Face Off. And then he did City of Angels in 1998. So I guess if I'm putting the timeline wrong, 97. Yeah, I think he'd just gotten enough of action movies. God, that's so funny. Would he have been Neo?
I would assume, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I could, I mean, I could almost see it.
Yeah, he has that sort of stoic knife quality to some of his performances, like Raising and Arizona, where you could see him be this sort of tabula rasa for all this stuff.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
He's too old by then. He can't have a Neo with a receding hairline. It's also become lore verified by composer Don Davis that Johnny Depp was the studio's first choice for Neo. And if they didn't want him, I think he said that all the studios at the time couldn't get Johnny Depp, so they'd go to Brad Pitt or Val Kilmer. They told the Wachowskis that if Brad Pitt would do the picture, they'd greenlight it right then. So Val Kilmer and Brad Pitt said no. So it sort of came down to Johnny Depp and Keanu Reeves.
I just want to say that Keanu Reeves is 10 months younger than Nicolas Cage.
Man, jeans
and
hair, really, really wild stuff. Leonardo DiCaprio was also signed on at one point, but he got spooked away by the extensive visual effects that the film was going to require, which, after having just undergone a prolonged stay in a watery hell called Titanic, shepherded by James Cameron, I think is quite understandable.
Okay, yeah.
I cannot stop thinking about how much this movie would have sucked with any of those other people. Johnny Depp would have made some kind of weird choice.
Yeah.
Like he would have been like, oh, he's going to have a Congolese
They all
accent,
would have made
or-
weird choices. Nick Cage
Yes,
would have made
that's
weird
true.
choices. Leonardo DiCaprio would have made a weird choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I had never heard this before. They offered it to Sandra Bullock. Dee Bonaventura and Joel Silver had both worked with her on the also Sylvester Stallone starring Demolition Man, which is a great movie. And they basically said that they would change the character of Neo to a girl. Dee Bonaventura told The Wrap this in 2019. He said it was pretty simple. We sent her the script to see if she was interested in it. And if she was interested, we would try to make the change. It just wasn't something for her at the time, so it didn't really go anywhere. Bullock told the Today Show in 2009, though, that she was considered for the role of Trinity as well, and she regretted not taking it. So either she's misremembering it, or they were so desperate to get Sandra Bullock on board, they basically handed her the script and was like, you can play anyone, which is amazing, because I would like to have seen her play Morpheus. This brings us to sweet angel baby Keanu Reeves. It is the funniest thing to me in the world that Keanu is like the only unproblematic person that we have of his stature at this point. I think, like, before Matthew Perry died and he became bad to say anything bad about him, his autobiography came out, like, and there was like a throwaway line in it about how he felt the Friends cast were like unfairly compensated or something, or something, griping, and used Keanu Reeves as an example of like not talented actors or something like that. And the entire Twitter just turned against him. It was like, you keep Keanu's name out of your mouth.
Well, I think it became a recurring punchline in the memoir, if I recall. I don't think it was a throwaway line. I think it was just a recurring joke in the book. I could be wrong. I've actually read it, but I believe it was a multiple reference kind of deal where he just became shorthand for...
Keanu would never stoop so low, I have to assume. Yeah, I think there's like a backlash brewing against the like canonization of him, but I am not here for a part of it. I think I love the guy. I mean, he makes such fascinating choices from a person of his stature,
Mm.
and he has his thing dialed in so precisely. Like people, I maybe just the few critics I read, but people like have like gone back and revisioned Paul Walker as a good actor, which is stupid. But like Keanu really, I think, learned how to dial in his kind of blankness and like affect into what's become gravity in his older age. Um, there's this amazing line in one of the John Wicks where someone is like asks him like why he's like praying to his wife or something, and or talking to his dead wife. And spoiler alert for a franchise that hinges entirely around that one plot point and is like 10 years old. Um, and they're like, would you think that she can hear you? And he says no. And they're like, why do you do it then? And he just says, maybe I'm wrong. And like invests such like, I just got chills thinking about it. Like there's such like world weary. I mean, he's truly become like Clint Eastwood in like a non-problematic way.
Wow. Yeah.
But he had a rough 90s. He had all three of these films came out in 1991. Bill and Ted, Point Break, and My Private Idaho.
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, the sequel.
Bogus Journey, not the original. Yeah, but all three of those films in 1991.
That's exhausting.
And then Speed eventually came out, and then he proceeded to... Oh, and then he did Bram Stoker's Dracula, which obviously the poor guy is terrible in. He's desperately at odds with that accent. But, he then just kept ping-ponging around to these weird choices. Like, he did A Walk in the Clouds and Feeling Minnesota, which are both romances. And then he did Johnny Mnemonic in 1995, which is like on the sort of Where Are They Now VHS shelf alongside Hackers and Lawnmower Man, in that it was one of these group of mid-90s movies that were kind of trying to tackle how we were going to understand the internet and virtual reality and all this stuff. I believe one of the plot points of Johnny Mnemonic is that they have to put his consciousness into a dolphin. Or maybe the other way around.
No, it's co-starring Dolph Lundgren. I think maybe that's what you're...
That film, though, at least did achieve one thing. It helped inspire the Wachowskis. Keanu's most recent film at the time had been the schlocky Devil's Advocate, in which he is literally that, and Al Pacino plays the devil. And it's exactly as fun as that sounds, but it didn't exactly place him at the top of Warner Brothers' call list. Keanu did tell Wired, though, of The Matrix, when I first read the script, it made my blood happy, which is such a wonderfully weird and like touching thing for an artist to say about anything. Like, yeah, man, that movie makes my blood happy. Especially if you read it in his cadence, like when I first read that script, it made my blood happy.
Made my blood happy.
Made my blood happy. At one of their first meetings, the Wachowskis told Reeves they'd need him to undergo 4 months of training prior to filming, and in his words, he got a big grin on my face and said, yes. We'll get to that training regimen later. The studio was looking for a relative unknown to play Trinity, and the woman who would eventually go on to play her, Carrie-Anne Moss, was at first, like everyone else, daunted by the physical demands of the script and doubtful of the Wachowskis' abilities to wrangle such a blockbuster with so many moving parts. Still, after spending an hour with them going through the storyboards, she was mollified. This is the funniest thing to me. I guess because she was unknown, she'd done some bit parts in Canada and stuff. Her screen test for this movie was like days and hours and days of doing some of this physical stuff. She told Wired I couldn't walk for days after it.
Jesus.
And I think because of her stature, she was the only person that this was subjected to. Like I'd talk about this later, but all of the other stars came in and were like, wow, we had no idea this was going to be this hard. And Carrie-Anne Moss was like, I did. But, she told Entertainment Weekly, I had no career before this. None. That said, the audition scene did come back to bite her because I guess the nightclub scene was what she auditioned with. And she told The Guardian, they had me in a stiletto and I could barely do the seam, stiletto shoe. Suddenly we were there on the day of shooting and I was unsteady. There's this whole thing in the nightclub when I'm whispering in Keanu's ear and I'm supposed to be really grounded and strong. And yet I could barely stand straight. So they took those off and gave me a boot with a nice solid heel. This is also really wild to me. Janet Jackson was supposedly attached to the role of Trinity, and she had to back out because she couldn't make it work with her touring commitments. And this bothered her so much that she referenced The Matrix in the intro and outro interludes on her 10th studio album, Discipline.
I could almost see her killing that. What do you think?
It's funny to me that they wanted like this relationship to be interracial because the other people that they were going to cast were Rosie Perez, Salma Hayek, and Jada Pinkett Smith.
Oh, wow.
So there was some kind of a dimension to that they were interested in purposefully exploring. I think all of those people are wrong, except for maybe Janet Jackson, though I don't think I've seen her act. She could certainly have learned Kung Fu, though. I mean, the woman is an incredible dancer and was in the best shape of her life at that point, coming off of like Velvet Rope and all of her other 90s bangers. But yeah, they all auditioned for it. It's kind of interesting to me that the Wachowskis wanted an interracial romance to be at the center of this, but given some of their other stuff, not the trans stuff, I just mean some of the way that they talk about stuff, because they're Chicago white people, could have been handled a little insensitively.
Fair.
So I'm glad that they didn't.
Well, Janet Jackson would have just been coming off Poetic Justice, the John Singleton movie, which was kind of her best acting role, I think, for somebody who's not seen everything she's been in. I remember that being pretty good. I mean, it was like after that she did Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, so there's not really a lot to choose from. But, that's really interesting. This all brings us to casting Morpheus, which ultimately came down to Lawrence Fishburne, who the Wachowskis were for from the very start. Warner Brothers, on the other hand, wanted Val Kilmer. Oh.
It's funny, too, because of how toxic he was considered right around the time, because Island of Dr. Moreau came out, which was supposed to be this big... That's really fascinating and kind of horror sci-fi, because it was supposed to be this big swing. The director of that... Richard Stanley. He'd made this kind of cult sci-fi hit called Hardware. And as just what we're talking about with Wachowskis, as it happens, the next thing that he was given was this, or maybe not the next thing, but one of the things that he was given out of the success of that film was this Island of Dr. Moreau remake, which was supposed to be this huge thing. They had Brando as Dr. Moreau. And between Richard Stanley, Val Kilmer, and Marlon Brando's egos, there was no room left on the island for that movie. And it became one of the most talked about catastrophic flops of the era, and he was essentially like blacklisted from making movies for a while. Richard Stanley was.
But that movie did inspire Mini-Me, the character of Mini-Me in Austin
Yes,
Powers.
it did.
That I do know.
That's true, it did.
Anything that inspired Mini-Me has got to be problematic.
There's a great Val Kilmer anecdote in here later, though. I forgot where I put it. Maybe I didn't.
I thought I remember there being another Val Kilmer anecdote in here.
Yeah, sorry. It was like the next sentence out of your mouth, and I just started rambling about Island of Dr. Moreau. The TMI promise.
Yes, I had a meeting with Val Kilmer, which went about as well as one might expect, given all that we just said about Val Kilmer. The executive Lorenzo Di Ventura told Wired, "We have a meeting with him at the Bel Air Hotel, where he proceeds to pitch why Morpheus should be the lead of the movie." I knew within 2 minutes of the meeting that we were dead. Also considered were Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I can see, but would just
it's because of Batman and Robin.
Right.
That was Joel Silver. Joel Silver had him because of that and was like, yeah.
And Michael Douglas? What the hell is that?
Douglas might have been able to summon some kind of like scrappy, gravelly voiced charm out of it, but he's so little. I just cannot find him imposing.
There's nothing mysterious about him.
That's true. I've seen his butt.
In what? Why?
Basic Instinct?
Oh, yeah. Unless he was going for like cold lizard-like fury of Gordon Gekko, like which.
Yeah, I mean, there could have been a kind of quiet scorn to his performance of Morpheus, but again, that's what I'm talking about. Any one of these other people, and you throw off the chemistry of the whole thing.
Totally.
You'd be talking about it like, yeah, I know that Matrix movie is really good, but Arnold?
Yeah.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
The story of how the Wachowskis got Lawrence Fishburne in their mind for Morpheus is very strange. They met him in Las Vegas in the summer of 1997 at the boxing match in which Mike Tyson bit the ear of Evander Holyfield. That's probably my favorite factoid of this entire episode. That's amazing.
Especially when you consider how weird they were to him.
Yeah. Lana Wachowski would later tell Fishburne, I had a dream about a man who wore mirrored sunglasses and spoke in riddles. And when I met you and heard your voice, I knew you were that guy.
What an insane thing to say to a person.
Fishburne, for his part, was undaunted by the what you describe as naughty script, Knotty. Would you like to explain naughty script? Dense script.
Yes, dense
script. He told Vulture in 2020 after being presented with the script, I never had any questions about whether or not it works structurally, thematically, or anything on the page. There were no red flags on the page for me at all. And then when I met Lana and Lily, they said they wanted to make a live-action anime. I was like, yes, please. He thought the character was a mix of Darth Vader, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Muhammad Ali, and Bruce Lee, and arrived at Morpheus' Stentorian voice by combining Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone, wow, I never even thought of that, Leonard Nimoy, Spock from Star Trek, and James Earl Jones, Darth Vader. Wow, yeah, right on. Totally, it's exactly what that is.
Yep.
The Wachowskis also told him to base the performance on the character with the same name in Neil Gaiman's famous comic book series, Sandman.
Little on the nose, but sure.
Yeah. The Australian actor Hugo Weaving, who was probably best known in America at that point for his role in the drag queen cult classic comedy Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, flew to Los Angeles to meet the Wachowskis after hearing about the role from his agent, spurred by how much he liked the movie Bound. The pair, meanwhile, loved Hugo Weaving from both the Priscilla movie and also his 1991 romantic comedy Proof, in which he co-stars alongside a young Russell Crowe.
It's so funny to me how few Australian movies escape containment. People become these huge stars there, and then they come to the US and we're like, what did you do?
No.
I don't get it.
Like everyone, he was briefed on the extensive training that he would need to undergo for the production, along with the storyboards. And all three, Hugo and the Wachowskis, agreed that while being an ultra menacing, omnipotent baddie, Agent Smith would have a touch of humor to him. Part of developing more human-like emotions as the film continues. Weaving asked at one point if Agent Smith could have a song and dance number, which that would have been chilling. I like that a lot.
He's so good in this movie, and it's so funny to me that then they took him. I mean, he had a big era, right? Because he was in all the Lord of the Rings movies. Yeah. He was in V for Vendetta, and then and I think now he just plays in Australia because he doesn't like flying as much or being away from his family, but he is so good in this. His kind of sterile but deeply felt menace is so perfect. That monologue he gives to Morpheus about this place. I feel myself becoming tainted by the stink of it. It's so good. I love that they took a swing on this random dude in Australia who looks like an accountant and got one of the most iconic villains of the sci-fi canon out of it, you know?
Well, you're right. He's a blank slate. It couldn't have been anybody that anybody in America knew.
That's true. Yeah. If they'd brought in, who would have been a John Malkovich? Actually, John Malkovich would have killed this. Are you kidding me? John Malkovich would have ate. Who could have they brought in who would have ruined it? Who was big at the time? Well, Al Pacino. That Trinity's got a great ass.
I love how his entire work. That was the one line I was thinking of, and you also were. I mean, Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
I could almost see if you squint.
The thing is, Neo, I am inevitability, Mr. Anderson. Actually, Mr. Anderson is so perfectly placed in the voice of Jack Nicholson that I have to.
Yeah.
I must begrudgingly give it to him just because of how funny that would be to hear him say that all the time.
I could almost see how they would maybe even consider Jack Nicholson for that, just because he kind of looks like an accountant.
Yeah.
So as good as it gets era.
Yeah.
But it ultimately went to the incredible Hugo Weaving, who would, of course, go on to star as the hero of the Wachowskis' adaptation of V for Vendetta, which was their first post-Matrix work. Oh, I guess with all the sequels, yeah, it was what,
Well,
2005?
the second and third ones were shot together, which I didn't realize.
Oh, I
And
didn't remember
like
that either.
insane to me that anyone lived through that ordeal of just shooting these two bloated. I mean, the second one is famously the one where they built a highway to stage a car chase. Yeah, and they upped the number. I read this because I was reading about obviously about the effects, but in the first Matrix film, there's like 412 computer assisted shots, and in the second one, there are over 10,000.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I actually have a big soft spot for the V for Vendetta movie. I think it, obviously, those stupid masks have attained a second life all over the internet. But I think, yeah, man, it's hard to take something that is similarly so insane and dense, which is everything that Alan Moore gets his hands on or has created, and turn it into like what I think is a pretty okay adaptation with a lot of genuinely anti-government sentiment. And still make a movie that kicks ass, and it does.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, Heigl.
Joey Pate. Sorry, set me up.
Well, Heigl, now we come to my favorite part of the program, a segment that we don't get to anywhere near enough on TMI. Tell us about Joey Pants. Welcome to the Joey Pants corner.
The Joey Pants time. This factoid about him was going around on Twitter as I was researching this, which is hilarious. Do you know that the wig he wore in The Sopranos, he wanted to look like Christopher Nolan?
No.
Supposedly.
Wow.
It's the exact same hair part that Christopher Nolan has in the kind of like straw colored blonde. The Wachowskis knew Joey Pants from Bound, which is so funny. And they wrote, he seems like such a kind of sweet guy who's just kind of like maybe a little baffled at his own place in Hollywood, but like they wrote the character in the film specifically for him, which is hilarious. And he thinks that they also cast him because he wouldn't get anything that was going on. He said they might have had a twinkle in their eye to give me this job because they saw me as blissfully ignorant. He didn't read the script, which is the funniest thing. And this is a long setup that all comes from this independent article, interview that he gave in 2021. So bear with us. He was having a meeting with the Wachowskis when they told him that Warner Brothers wanted to cut the steak scene, which is his character's most memorable part in the film. It's this great monologue that lays out why he turns on Morpheus. He's discovered that real life is hell and he wants to get plugged back into the Matrix. So they told him, hey, the steak scene, like Warner wants us to cut that. And Keanu is fighting them on it. And Joey Pants, having not read the script, assumed that this was another of Keanu's scenes. And he said, well, tell him to get the over it. He's in 99% of the movie. And they just started laughing at him because he had just shown his ass that he had not read the script. And he continued to show his ass in front of his castmates. They were at a party at Carrie-Anne Moss's house, and in Joey Pants' words, we're all just bullshit around. I'm trying to be interesting. So I say to Keanu, hey man, I'm glad they kept the steak scene. We're going to have some fun with that. It goes so quiet you can hear a pin drop, except for the Wachowskis, who are on the floor laughing with tears coming out of their eyes. Finally, they're able to catch their breath long enough for Lana to say, he didn't read the fucking script. And bless him, he developed the simplest workaround for the intense physical demands that were placed on the cast. He told Wired, they wanted me to be in the best shape of my life. He was in his mid-40s at the time. No drinking, eating steamed vegetables, working at a gym. I'm a character actor. This trainer they hired said to me, you can do 3,000 sit-ups a day, but that ain't going nowhere. Presumably his midsection. So I talked to my buddy, a plastic surgeon, and I decided I'm going to get an $8,000 liposuction procedure. Pantoliano subsequently sent the bill for the surgery to the studio, claiming that the liposuction counted as research and development. He was never reimbursed.
It's development, in a way, in a sense.
Developed him. The cast was handed a reading list by the Wachowskis before filming started. The aforementioned Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard of the French. This was required reading for most of the principal cast and crew. And they also sent Keanu Reeves, Kevin Kelly's Out of Control, The New Biology of Machines, and Dylan Evans' ideas on evolutionary psychology. And I didn't put this in here, but there's a quote from Joel Silver that were like somewhere that's like, man, people think Keanu's dumb, but he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He'll send me books that he's reading that I have no idea what's going on in them. Which, Joel Silver, but still.
Maybe Keanu's like, read this and tell me what's going on in it.
Don't you back off. You careful, counselor. Bless their hearts, the Wachowskis went straight to the source for the guy that they knew could help them stage convincingly Hong Kong-style fights. Yuen Wo-ping, who is a legend in the industry who'd helped launch the career of Jackie Chan in the late 70s, basically responsible for the some of the most riveting fight scenes that only complete nerds would have seen at this point in the late 80s and 90s by importing stuff from Hong Kong. The Wachowskis especially liked his choreography work on 1994's Fist of Legend, starring Jet Li, and wanted him to work on their film, but he'd already turned down several offers from Hollywood. Basically, he just thought his English wasn't good enough to work here. He told the South China Morning Post in 2019, what happened then was that one of the producers of The Matrix contacted Shaw Brothers to find me. This is the famous Hong Kong production studio. They seemed to want me to go to Hollywood really badly, but I still didn't want to go. The Shaw Brothers studio told me that the producer was offering me a free ticket to Los Angeles, and all I had to do was turn up there and have a chat, and that I should go, as it would be the polite thing to do. But like everyone else, he was charmed by the Wachowskis' energy, and he took the job. The principal cast members, Carrie-Anne Moss, Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, and Hugo Weaving, spent 4 months training with Yuen Wo-ping and his stunt team before filming even started. 5 days a week, hours a day, 6 days maybe, actually, because I think he says later that Sunday is their day off.
Yeah.
This wasn't just for fight choreography. They also had to learn the wire work, Hong Kong-style wire work, which is really intrinsic to the way that the characters move. And it was so necessary to the way that the Wachowskis visualized this because they were trying to make a comic book and their closest visual cue in pictures was anime. So they wanted to have their characters kind of float and fly around in a way that comic book characters would. Still, this took a toll. Hugo Weaving told Wired, after the first day, I was so shattered and so shocked. I realized I was so unfit. He damaged his femur at one point.
Ooh.
He had to have surgery because of some like polyp on his leg. And then he came back on crutches basically. And Keanu had also had surgery recently. He at one point in the 90s, he had to undergo a 2-level fusion of his spine in his neck area, his cervical spine, because he had a herniated disc. So as anyone knows, that's not a light deal.
No.
He told Wired, I was falling over in the shower in the morning because you lose your sense of balance. One of the film's producers said that he was told by a doctor this operation was needed or else he could wind up a quadriplegic. So, consequently, Keanu showed up in Burbank for training wearing a neck brace. And he was forbidden from kicking before he sufficiently recovered. And he talks about how his character actually doesn't do a ton of kicks in the movie, which I don't think is really true. He does a lot that I can remember, but I don't know. I'm not going to contradict him. I will have to say, for real nerds for this movie, and I speak as one of you, if you haven't, you should check out the documentary The Matrix Revisited, which is like 2 hours long. It's on YouTube. And there are these really heartrending scenes of Keanu in a neck brace training, and what I can see is recognizable choreography from this movie, and like going into these moves and then like collapsing in pain or like wincing and walking away because he up his neck. I was just like, you sweet boy. Yuen Wo-ping said he initially thought that 2 months of training would be enough to get the cast up to speed, and then when he saw what he was dealing with for the first time, he got dizzy and started to think that 4 months wouldn't even be enough. It's really fascinating how he designed, and this is part of his genius and what he's done in all of his films. He designs the choreography to reflect the character traits of the people doing the fighting. Neo is this, determined, scrappy character, and he's got an aggressive, fast punching offense. They highlighted Carrie-Anne Moss's femininity by having her do a lot of these really graceful kind of high kicks. The famous 2 ones that she does is this sort of high kick to knock somebody out who's behind her, and the quote unquote scorpion kick that she does at one point. Agent Smith is this omnipotent badass, so he just kind of bulldozes his way through scenes with these big boxing style heavyweight punches. Morpheus has this kind of mentor-like sense of authority and purpose. Oh yeah, I don't know if you want to keep this because it's sort of weird, but Yuen Wo-ping said of Lawrence Fishburne that he was born talented at bouncing and jumping, which is a weirdly racial thing to say. So I don't know if you want to put that in. Carrie Ann Moss did a lot of her own stunts. She did that crazy building jump that she did in the movie.
Damn.
I remember talking about that she does in the opening to the movie, I should say. I also remember when I was reading about the making of The Matrix Reloaded, everyone said that she became the best stunt driver among them. That's fascinating.
Rules.
The film's executive producer, Barry Osborne, said most American stunt work uses rams or pneumatics to project a person through the air at a certain speed. With Hong Kong style. So that's like a pressurized ramp that you would see for a lot. It's how you get the big hero shot of somebody sprinting away from an explosion and getting like launched through the air. Basically step on a ramp that's powered by compressed air, and then you get launched onto like a soft landing. Or you'll be thrown in a direction via a ram, similarly like a soft ram.
That sounds insane to me.
It is, yeah. I mean, and to be fair, like Hollywood also did wire stuff. Like, I mean, famously permanently injuring Ellen Burstyn's spine on the set of The Exorcist,
that's right.
when the cable guys yanked her back too hard. But the stunts are, Osborne says that with wire work, the stunts are far more controlled and very stylized. It's almost like puppeteering, but using a real person. It takes tremendous skill and finesse. And so having brought over his wire work team from Hong Kong, Yen Wo-ping described it basically a 3-step process for getting the American cast up to that. We had to train the cast to work with the wires, to balance with them, and then to hoist them up in the air and land. He says the most difficult part of that process is landing without losing your balance. I mean, basically, for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, they literally just are pulling people up and down and controlling their landings via wires that are removed, like, and strapped under the wardrobe. The costume designer later on says that she designed all of their wardrobes to be able to fit all this complex gear under them.
And those are thin outfits, though. I mean, I guess thinking of Trinity's, like everything's like very fitted.
Yeah. In that opening scene, they also had a fiberglass plate inserted under it because the human body is not really designed to hold itself in that rigid, straight pose that she does, as long as it needed to while flying through the air. So they basically have her propped up and or molded into shape by a rigid fiberglass plate under her wardrobe. And then the cables are stretched to that so she can hold the Superman pose. It's just wild. Reeves' stunt double on this film is a guy named Chad Stileski, who went on to helm the John Wick movies. He told Sci-Fi sci-fi.com that wire work may look fun, but it's painful. You're in a tiny little harness, and it's wrecking your hips and squeezing your other parts. So the level of endurance you have to go through every day for months, it's phenomenal. Very few people do what the Wachowskis were demanding of their cast. And again, one of my favorite bits of this is that universally, to a man, everyone talks about how gung-ho Keanu was about all of this. Yen Wo-ping says that he was the person who was most obsessed with getting his form correct. He would ask to train on Sundays, which was their day off. He also, and I did debated including this because I saw it kind of put up in like janky listicles without being verified elsewhere, but somebody was claiming that he did that ledge walk scene by himself.
Oh God.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Also insane that at the end of filming, he further starved himself to lose 15 pounds and then shaved his head and eyebrows to do the goo waking up scene at the end. God love him. The film's Australian stunt coordinator, a guy named Glenn Boswell, told Sci-Fi, the Chinese team didn't all speak English. That was a bit of an issue. There were certain things they wanted to do that we couldn't do based on government guidelines, and we had to try to explain that to them. Some of it was simple things, like when they used a wire, they tied a knot in the wire to connect it to the actor. That's illegal. Certain wires cannot sustain a person, or there are certain ways you have to use a pulley. The stunt department ended up rigging most of the wire work. The wire work that the Chinese would do was more about suspending actors during a fight, and the wire work that the stunt department would do is anything that involved flying, leaping, or having heavy impacts. I'm reminded of when Jackie Chan brought his own stunt team over to do Rush Hour, and he kept wanting to do things that they legally could not do in the States, like jump across buildings. And he would be like, I don't understand why that's possible. And they're like, well, we have laws here.
Owen Patterson was the Australian set designer who created much of the look of The Matrix. He was essentially tasked with creating 2 sets at once, one for the real world and Morpheus's ship, the Nebuchadnezzar, and the other dystopian environs. They were also dealing with the fact that the world of The Matrix and the real world would be lit completely differently. The Matrix has a green tint, like an old word processor text with an uncanny cleanness and orderliness to it. And the real world is done almost completely in blue and grays, which was obviously aged and distressed.
All the props were like filthy and disgusting.
Patterson, the set designer, told a fan site, "In the last stages of pre-production, we built several sets and sat down in a studio space with a sample of each of the colors we were going to use throughout the film. And because of the extensive needs of the fight scenes and stunts, they simply built most of the sets they needed, including rooftops, the dojo, and the office building."
They built the subway set around an existing station, but because they had to do all this crazy camera work and wire work, they were also like, well, we need to be able to move walls and floors and all this stuff. So it's just, they would just built these enormous bespoke custom sets.
God, that stuff's so interesting to me, especially
it's nuts
when they like half film on location and then have to completely replicate it to do exactly what you just said, move walls. That's just insane to me.
Oh, I think I put this later on, but the office set where they do the rescue and the lobby fight and everything, that was so big that it just was installed and built in an actual block of office buildings. And outside of it, for the shots where they have to do the helicopter jump and stuff, it was a 3-story, what they call a cyclorama, which is just like a movable background that you use in movies. So that thing was literally, they had this office building set, and then they had a background for it so that they could shoot out of the office that was as large as another building.
What was the movie? It might have been a Muppets Christmas Carol, where there was just an entire floor beneath the set.
Oh, it's that in Roger Rabbit. It's that in Roger Rabbit, yeah.
That is so insane to me.
Yep, and now they would just do it all with CGI. Yep. It would look like gray garbage.
Yep, yes it would.
The worst thing to me, the most unforgivable thing about the Matrix Revolutions, the fourth one, is that they are just obsessed with, whichever one of them did it, I think it was Lily, was just obsessed with making like this personal statement about how the original Matrix had been kind of co-opted and taken out of her hands and people. Anyway, it's kind of interesting conceptually, but one of the ways that they lampshade it constantly is by having scenes from the old movie constantly like portrayed or rendered in the film. And it's just so sad to see something that was shot on film with actual sets and a real wardrobe contrasted against this gray shot on digital flat look that everything has now, because it just, even these filmmakers, like they've been so quote unquote, I guess, reduced that Netflix wouldn't give them enough money to make it look remotely similar to the other movies. Ugh. Obligatory
old man yells at cloud.
Old man yells at cloud moment.
Well, cinematographer Bill Pope said in an interview, "The sets for The Matrix were immense, the biggest I personally have ever seen. And as you mentioned earlier, the set for the office building was so large that it was incorporated into an actual block of offices in Sydney. Because the Wachowskis were shooting for realism, they really had to build a lot of the future tech invented for the film, like the pods and all the tech that keeps people trapped in them. Manually triggered air power plugs that go into the spine, the needle that pops out of the back of the head. All that stuff was built from scratch and designed to function as it would in, quote unquote, real life. Even the weird tool gun that Moss uses to extract the tracking device from Neo was a real object that not only had to have a functional handle to manipulate, but also had to be able to suction a prop into its chamber and eject it with a video screen. None of that was composited. And what was shown on the video screen was actually broadcast to the prop from offset. So, man, that's so much effort.
And so many moving parts. It's just insane. And I mean, they did that the way that you would do like a lot of stuff, like where it's moving through his guts or whatever. That's like a fake stomach. And then someone is moving the bug prop through it. But just the idea of being like, yeah, you have to create something that has, both suction and pneumatic air. And it also has to have a screen. Go. Like, just nuts, man.
And then on the flip side, I was talking with somebody today about the lightsabers in A New Hope and how I guess the original ones, like, because obviously the sword part itself was added in post. The grip was just like a vintage. I think it was like a camera flash or something.
Oh,
and you
nice.
can see like in some of the shots, especially on like the
The pre-cleaned up editions.
no, the post cleaned up editions. That it's the really high res version. You can still like see the logo from the camera flash on it or something.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like there's two ways to approach props in the pre CGI age, I guess. The Wachowskis chose violence and chaos. That is insane to me. Additional fun fact, one of the rooftop sets the actors run across was from Alex Proyas's Dark City, which you say is funny, given how much the films get compared. Tell us more about that. I don't know anything about this.
Oh, that's a great movie. Alex Proyas did the original Crow, which is timely once again with this rebooted piece of ass that is coming out. The look of that film is so embarrassing. But Proyas did the original Crow, and Dark City is this really far out kind of concept that happens to suspiciously mirror that of The Matrix. It's this gorgeous neo-noir, German expressionist, gothic city that is inhabited by these creepy, it's controlled by these creepy, I mean, they basically all look like different versions of Nosferatu, who put these omnipotent beings who kind of force everyone to go to sleep and move the city around in their dreams and like rearrange the cityscape according to people's memory, and one protagonist who's like waking up to that reality. It's a really beautiful film, and it's the funniest thing that I know about it is that Roger Ebert loved Alex Proyas and would like 4-star every single one of his movies, even like the not good ones. But yeah, Dark City whips. Check it out.
Cool. Costume designer Kim Barrett worked on all 3 films in the Matrix trilogy, and she's responsible for the iconic long coats. Those came from her envisioning their characters as superheroes. The Wachowskis wanted a cape-esque feature to swirl around as they flew about, and they were all designed functionally to work with the stunt rigs. For example, Trinity's already form-fitting costume at times had to fit over, you mentioned this earlier, had to fit over a rigid fiberglass plate to keep her body rigid while flying through the air. Barrett said, "We had to put in a plate that's molded to her body shape underneath, then harness them up and put their costume over the top. So there's a lot of lacing and tying up." And I really like this. Hugo Weaving got off the easiest in terms of all the costumes. They dressed him up in a 60s style Secret Service suit, which I think is a really cool suit. Very Mad Men.
Yeah.
Although anything white that he was wearing in the Matrix world was sent through a green wash to help with the whole coloring tint of that world.
They it's funny because she also talks about they would do wind tests with all of the coats. So they had like leather ones, which obviously don't like flap in the wind. So they were just like holding coats in front of fans and seeing how that they would flutter the most cinematically.
That's so funny. I always just assumed it was leather.
Yeah, no.
What would it have been? Like PVC? Must have been.
Read the next sentence.
Oh, let's see. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Costumes were designed with a limited budget in mind. Barrett wanted Trinity to, quote, seem like an oil slick. I love that. So she dressed her in mostly PVC, while Neo's coat was a wool blend that cost $3 a yard. Barrett also designed all of the characters' boots. And since there are so many close-ups of people's feet, they couldn't source anything that had a logo on it.
It's crazy to me that Keanu does all that stuff in these huge industrial goth boots.
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I don't think I've ever found this out, whether or not he did he does that kick at the end where he kicks Agent Smith and then holds his leg up and rotates his hip joint and then brings it 90 degrees around. I have no idea if they did that with wires or not, but if they didn't, he must have been a tremendously strong man.
Yeah.
Because that is so hard, even barefoot, and he does it in these enormous Doc Martens ass buckle boots.
That's so weird. He's going to be 60 this year.
Yeah. I really want him to start getting his like elder gravitas roles, like age into like his Bill Murray drama phase.
Costume designer Kim Barrett also commissioned the film's custom eyewear from indie designer Richard Walker, whose line Blind Design was then sold with an E, was then sold at high-end retailers like Barney's in New York. Actors had to sit through the arduous body casting process since each pair of these glasses was handmade to their bone structures, and they only had 2 or 3 pairs per actor. A difficult consideration to factor in when much of your film is things flying in people's faces. Wow. Yeah, that seems like something you maybe would want to spring for a little more.
Especially the little tiny armless ones that Morpheus has that just go over the bridge of your nose. Like,
that's wild. For camera work, the Wachowskis reteamed with their cinematographer Bill Pope, we mentioned earlier, who'd worked with them on Bound. And funnily enough, the Wachowskis knew him from his work on Army of Darkness, the third installment of the Evil Dead franchise. In an interview with the American Society of Cinematographers, Pope explained, "We didn't necessarily want the Matrix world to resemble our present world. We didn't want any cheery blue skies. In Australia, the sky is a brilliant blue virtually all the time, but we wanted bald white skies. All of our translite backings for stage work were altered to have white skies, and on actual exterior shots in which we see a lot of sky, we digitally enhanced the skies to make them white. Additionally, since we wanted the Matrix reality to be really unappealing, we asked ourselves, what is the most unappealing color? I think we all agreed on green. So for those scenes, we sometimes used green filters, and I'd add a bit of green to the color timing."
this must have been one of the last movies to do that because isn't Oh Brother, Where Art Thou the first film that was like 100% digitally color corrected?
I didn't know that. Wow.
And I think this would have been that would have been like the year after this.
Yeah, it was 2000. Well, because I remember when we were doing the episode on Freaks and Geeks, they were talking about how they would color dye.
Just with gray,
Which is
so
gray,
everything
yeah.
looked
All
disgusting.
washed out, yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Let's just go to the sound design corner. Why not?
Let's do it.
Yeah, one of them is from the film's audio guys, Dane Davis, which is just I love sound. I love Foley, Foley movie sound design work. I'm always tickled to hear how they get specific sound effects, and to get adequate fight sounds, he would whip like car antennas past microphones to get the fist whooshing sound. And at one point, he also just had two jujitsu practitioners inside a recording booth for 4 days. It was just like, yeah, just fight each other. You just record.
Yeah, we'll get the best bits. Don't worry. Yeah, just keep going.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah. I'm in the booth. Yeah, rolling. It was like a 4x6 or 4x8 something too, which is even funnier that they were literally just wrestling in like a postage size stamp, like vocal booth, isolation booth.
Oh my God.
The sound of the Sentinel robots dying, he fired 2-inch lead cannonballs through a line of washing machines and trash bins filled with metal junk.
That's incredible. Wow. Oh, I had a question for you. I was just that weird that lightsaber factoid came up earlier today because I was trying to remember, how did they get what was it? Was it the sound of doors opening on the Death Star, or was something funny? Or it was just like paper being ripped, or it was something goofy.
Oh yeah, I don't. The Foley design of Star Wars is its own whole world, because it was so much of it was super cheap.
Yeah.
For that, especially for that first one. But now I can't place the exact thing that you're talking about. The other Davis connected to the film's sound was composer Don Davis. They are not. He and the sound guy are not related. The Wachowskis were big fans of Rage Against the Machine, which is a little on the nose, and Ministry, the pioneering industrial band whose groundbreaking drum programming would inspire everyone from ZZ Top, which is an actual real and true thing, to the Strokes. They loved the work that he had done on Bound, particularly one sound effect, which was the sound of a manipulated, digitally, like the sound of a pile driver machine, an actual IRL pile driver machine that he mixed into the sound effects and score. He said they were very happy with my approach to compose the score in a very minimalist and postmodern way. I think the minimalist thing really comes in there because I hear a lot of Philip Glass in the strings.
Oh yeah.
It does this one recurring motif that's actually quite funny, where it's just doing like a drum exercise. Like, I don't know if you've ever hung out with a bunch of drummers, but I have. And they'll do this thing on the. It's just basic drum rudiments where you take like a quarter note pulse and you just do the different rhythmic subdivisions over it. So you do quarter, dot, dot, eighth, dot, 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 triplet, dot, 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 16s, dot, 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 and that's just what the score does. Like at a certain point, it's like wah, 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 wah. So I just think that's neat. And he uses that pile driver thing again. He does it when Neo walks through the metal detector at the building, and each one of his steps make this huge, like, metallic, echoey, clanging noise. Really fascinating stuff.
Oh, but before we move on, I found what I was looking for. It was actually the doors opening on Star Trek. The doors of the Enterprise. The sound effects were made from a piece of paper being slid from an envelope.
It's like the one sample that they had, right? Like they reused it every single time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
I love that.
The big problem with the score was that the Wachowskis apparently wanted a choir and for some of the stuff, and Don Davis was like, "Well, the film was." He explained to the Hollywood Reporter, "The film was shot in Sydney. While the 5 or 6 SAG actors got waivers to shoot overseas, Warner Brothers was unwilling to engage the Screen Actors Guild for Los Angeles singers who work under a SAG contract. So I actually had to contract former members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and we recorded the vocal elements of the score in Salt Lake City." So there you have it, folks. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir is on the soundtrack to The Matrix. Probably interesting to no one but me, but he also talks about the process of scoring this. He would basically come up with themes and stuff on a synthesizer, play it to the Wachowskis as they showed him cuts and scenes, and then orchestrate it, which meant that basically he was able to match the orchestration precisely to the cuts of the film, so that they didn't have any temp music in this, which is a big thing in test screenings and stuff, where before the soundtrack is completed, people will just throw in like generic sounding classical or generic sounding film music, probably AI generated at this point.
Sure.
But they had the benefit of actually having this soundtrack go live to every single preview cut and screening that they sent. Also, fun facts. Don Davis is a big fan of anagrams.
Who isn't really?
It's true, but a lot of the titles in the Matrix score are like one of them. The dojo music is credited to the Bo Whisk Orchestra, which is an anagram of Wachowski brothers,
as they were at the time.
Yes. Please don't cancel us. I have so little money. Meanwhile, the selections for the film, just maybe the most 1999 soundtrack possible. Deftones, Rage Against the Machine, Marilyn Manson, perhaps most indelibly, Rob Zombie's asinine earworm Dragula, and then a lot of electronic artists. Massive Attack is in there, Propellerhead. My favorite cut from the movie, which is Rob Dugan's Club to Death, parentheses, Curé Amino mix, parentheses closed. That's most often known as the Woman in the Red Dress song. If you downloaded this from LimeWire, like I did back in the day, it was probably called The Woman in the Red Dress. That has some really cool classical string samples. Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations is the intro. Quotes samples Gustav Holst's Jupiter, the Bringer of Jollity, from his famous Planets Suite. And lastly, that song uses the Honey Drippers' iconic Impeach the President break, which is another one of the most sampled hip-hop, trip-hop, electronic drum breaks of all time. Sorry, I'm a big nerd. Well, I mean, part of the thing I love about about the electronic access to this is that, like, it really dovetails well with the movie's theme of, like, the organic versus the machines, you know, because it is all of this recontextualization of acoustic music, chopped and resampled and synthesized. So, clever stuff.
Wild stuff.
Wild. Yes. That hasn't come back for a while.
No, because I've been trained not to do it.
Probably speaking as what I always call movie magic. The biggest movie magic moments in the film are come from bullet time. No,
that was a sound of admiration.
It's just so silly to call it bullet time, but it was in the shooting script. The Wachowskis it's their term for how they would visualize how the characters are able to move at these superhuman speeds to dodge bullets. And in the shooting script, they describe it thusly: "We enter the liquid space of bullet time. The air sizzles with wads of lead like angry flies as Neo twists, bends, ducks just between them. Neo bent impossibly back, one hand on the ground as a spiraling gray ball shears open his shoulder." And that's it. They had no idea how they were going to pull this off. Lana told Wired, "People would say, 'Well, how are you going to do that?' And we were like, 'We're working on it.'" Most distilled down to its most basic essence, bullet time is basically wanting a camera to move at its normal speed while capturing slow motion imagery. And they initially took the most direct route to this by attaching a slow motion camera to like a really fast moving dolly or sled. That was quickly discarded for practical reasons. Mass Illusions was an SFX company that was later renamed Manex. But they had just won an Oscar for creating the afterlife that Robin Williams traverses in What Dreams May Come. But the Wachowskis actually met with them as early as 1996, when their script was still being worked on. And the Manex's person who ended up working on the Matrix, a guy named John Gaeta, he told Empire, "I would credit Otomo Katsuhiro, who co-wrote and directed Akira, which definitely blew me away, along with Michel Gondry."
Oh, wow.
Michel Gondry's music videos were experimenting with a type of technique called view morphing that you can see in, I forget which one. So the scene takes place, it was in the shooting script, takes place on a rooftop. But the way that they executed the bullet time portions of that was that Reeves was on a soundstage, all green walls. He was wired up, and 120 still cameras were kind of set up around him in a descending spiral. And as the wires pull him backwards and kind of hold him up, the cameras take still shots in a succession around him, while a pair of regular motion picture film cameras also capture his movements. So you add the live action stuff to the stills, and then you put that in a computer and composite it all together. And that scene, the backwards bend, took 2 years and cost $750,000. What? Also, they shot. I mean, they essentially also shot all that stuff twice. And in the Keanu's case, on the the roof of a 35-story building. Glenn Boswell told Sci-Fi, "I found a portable truss staging system where you can break it down into pieces to fit it into an elevator to get it to the rooftop. I just had to rig Keanu and get him to lean back in it so that they could shoot in a way where they didn't see it in the camera. After the bullet time was done on the roof, we had to do it in the studio and recreate and match what we did on the roof." So this was all draining for everyone, obviously. Chad Scalesi talks about, "Aside from regular shooting, we spent every weekend on a soundstage where we do the specific moves that the Wachowskis felt were going to be highlighted with bullet time. We did tests and rehearsals. The effects people would photograph me and the other doubles doing what they were going to have Keanu and the other actors do, and then they'd go back to the drawing board. That took months to dial in."
I mean, I almost need to do the math on this. That shot, how long is that in the movie?
Not long. Not very long at all.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. Those rehearsals were not just for the stunt team. Basically, they scanned the footage from these dry runs in, and then the computer spit out a tracking system for the cameras to trigger and capture their movements. To trigger and guide their movements, I should say. I'm imagining it's similar to what they did on Dead Ringers, which is where Jeremy Irons plays a set of twins, and they basically created early computer system that would move the camera in precisely the same ways, take after take, so that he could do both scenes or both parts.
I think we talked about that for The Parent Trap, actually, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But so after scanning the first footage into the computer and having the computer map the camera movements, they had to scan the stills back into the computer along with the motion picture footage, and then the computer would generate by itself in between images to kind of string all that disparate stuff together, just how animators would do it. Just really insane stuff. I cannot believe that and man, it's such a fascinating thing in film history because it is one of the first most genuinely innovative things I have seen that kind of came out of nowhere. They invented a visual language for this. Like slow motion existed, but people hadn't been trying to move cameras independently of slow motion. I mean, like when you think of like existing film special effects that had been up to this time, like really groundbreaking, it's all kind of iterations on existing technology. The only thing I can compare it to is the stuff James Cameron was doing in like The Abyss when he developed when he pushed them to develop like the morphing effects. Just nuts. And these two people, this was their first big budget movie.
Yeah,
like we will invent a new visual language and build it from scratch.
I mean, you almost need to wonder if so much of that came from the fact that they just didn't know what was and what wasn't possible.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then it was like, well, okay, well, we've got this budget. Get me somebody who can figure out how to do this. Go.
Yeah.
And then it became somebody else's headache, and they were just like tapping their watch. That's so
Incredible.
interesting. Yeah. Not to always bring it back to this, but my legally obligated Beatle moment. I mean, it's the same with the Beatles with a lot of the stuff that they were asking their producer George Martin to do because they just didn't know that it wasn't something they were supposed to be able to do, I like that.
Yeah.
But this rigor wasn't only reserved for bullet time scenes. Chad Stahelski, the stunt coordinator, continued, "For most stunts, you get 5 takes, maybe 10. But to show that Keanu and the actors were doing their own moves, the Wachowskis didn't want a lot of cuts. It wasn't weird to do 20 to 30 takes. 20 to 30 takes of these excruciating, painful moves. Wow. Incredible. This was actually something of a quiet revolution in Hollywood at the time, you right? Gotta give you credit.
Oh, thanks, man.
Whereas fight scenes prior to this were created in the edit room, centering around big hero punches or kicks strung together from lots of separate shots, movies like The Matrix and your beloved Blade, a year prior, created a new expectation that action heroes should convincingly be able to hold down fight scenes for longer than just 1 or 2 punches at a time.
I always say that you can judge how good of a fighter an actor is by the length of the cuts in any given fight scene. And it's really embarrassing when you go back and watch stuff pre-Blade and The Matrix. Like those 2 movies coming out of the 1-2 punch and then Crouching Tiger the following year was just like, oh, we have to make fight scenes look good now because everything else is just people throwing these big haymaker punches. I just watched Roadhouse recently and like Swayze, bless him, looks like a camel throwing his kicks. And that film is actually pretty good about having unbroken strings of action fight choreography. But yeah, man, like especially when you look at some of the Nick Cage stuff, I watched Con Air recently and it's just so like watching him do these fights. He's supposed to be this like special ranger badass. And it's just like so many quick cuts, so many different angles just to disguise the fact that these guys could only do like 1 or 2 things at a time. Whereas these Hong Kong guys are used to being like, okay, here's 30 moves to chain together that you have to memorize and we will film that until you get it right and then move on to the next 30. This film is due tomorrow.
Well, you have a fun fact about the stuntman, Chad Stahelski.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this poor guy, virtually everyone got injured. I think they had to start disguising the bruises on Morpheus and Keanu after the dojo fight scene because they didn't have any padding and they were just like wailing on each other's arms because so much of it is like this Chinese style Wing Chun blocking and punching and they just gave each other huge bruises up and down their forearms.
Oh my God.
Everyone got injured on this. I think Carrie-Anne Moss fractured her ankle doing the cartwheel off the wall in the lobby scene. It's just amazing that I can just name different shots in this movie and everyone will instantly go, yeah, that part was tight as hell. Stahelski got messed up though, specifically in the scene where they were shooting the subway fight where Agent Smith throws Neo up into the subway and then he hits the ground again. That got Chad, for his efforts, a dislocated shoulder, damaged knees, and several broken ribs.
Jesus Christ.
Worth it.
Yeah. Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, The Matrix started to run over time and budget. The Wachowskis threatened to walk if the studio started trimming scenes, but they were kind of helped in their feud with the studio by their film's editor, Zach Steinberg, who'd cut together some of the early scenes in the film, which he sent to the executives to mollify them, and this had the intended effect. The studio extended the shoot from 90 days to 118 days. So they added a month, 4 weeks. Still doesn't seem like a hell of a lot of time to me.
But Jordan, now it's time for lightning round.
Yes.
Facts that don't fit anywhere else.
Yes.
Or maybe they did, but I was writing it sequentially and did not reinsert them where they would have been appropriate.
They literally had to rewrite airspace laws in New South Wales, Australia to get the helicopter shots in because the full-scale shooting model of the helicopter didn't have blades. So they had to use a real helicopter and a few long shots, and they were filming in restricted airspace. Couldn't just add blades to a model helicopter? That seems like rather than getting the laws changed, that maybe seems like
I've restrained from a lot of anti-Australian sentiment in this, but it just speaks to the cartoonish nature of that country that they walked in and were like, hey, we got to rewrite some of your airspace laws. And Australia
we're
was
from
like,
Hollywood,
fine.
you know.
Yeah, and they're like, fine. We'll do it for a Foster's, like a Winnie Blues. Maybe a lamb kebab.
That's pretty good.
Vacation in Bali. I love Australians.
Yes.
Nick Cave is Australian. AC/DC are Australian.
Friend of the pod, Phil, is Australian.
And Phil.
Phil, yes. For the woman in the red dress scene, the directors hired several sets of twins to be in the crowd walking past, implying that since this was a training video, the programmer would have gotten a little lazy and just started copy-pasting people in. I love that.
I didn't talk a ton about the guns in this movie because I don't like glorifying guns, but just some fun notes about how they designed stuff. Like when Mouse gets, spoiler alert, killed by the agents, that he pulls out those huge machine guns and starts firing them. Those were custom designed for the movie. And the fact that the agents all carry Desert Eagle 50 cals is like a spoof or a joke that just like the Wachowskis talked when they talked to the film's armorer, they were like, oh yeah, and we want him to have like these huge guns. And the 50 cal Desert Eagle is like a clown gun. Like it should not exist in the real world because it's so large and you can't fire it one-handed. People can't handle the recoil. For reference, when the famous Dirty Harry speak, when he talks about the 357 Magnum, so a 50 cal Desert Eagle is 13 more than that in terms of gun measurements. So they gave them these 50 cal, these enormous guns, and we're just like, yeah, fire them one-handed all the time. It'll be cooler. It'll just look like the agents are that powerful that they can fire this tank cannon one-handed. I don't know. I think that's neat.
Also neat and equally kind of disturbing in its own way. The spring-loaded cell phones used in the film. There's something creepy because they're spring-loaded, and so there's like a violence to them when they pop open. Right? Come on, don't look at me like that.
I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then to my shock, you could not get it because they designed it.
Yes, these were Nokia stilettos, or 8110s, or 8110s. I don't know how you say that. And they were referred to colloquially as the banana phone. And that spring mechanism was indeed an addition for the film. So it did not come stock like that, which was disappointing.
Huge
for
failure.
young Alex Heigl. You touched on this earlier. Keanu Reeves and Hugo Weaving nicknamed each other the neck and the leg during pre-production in reference to their respective complicating injuries. Weaving had a polyp removed from his leg and would later crack 2 ribs and hurt his wrist. And Carrie-Anne Moss sprained her ankle shooting the lobby scene at one point, as you mentioned. The protein slop that the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar eats is rice porridge. Why is it called Nebuchadnezzar? I mean, I know that's an Egyptian king.
Yeah, it's an Old Testament reference.
Oh, of course. Gotcha. During the scene in the Oracle's living room where Neo meets other candidates for oneness, the 1972 rabbit horror movie Night of the Lepus is playing on TV. Rabbit horror, is that a genre? Is that a subgenre?
Other than Bunnicula and this movie, I don't think so. Well, maybe Monty Python.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the most famous scary rabbit of all time.
Speaking of TVs, the antique television Morpheus shows to Neo in the Construct is an AWA, Amalgamated Wireless Australasia, Radiola Deep Image Model 209C. Wow. I applaud the granular.
Hell yeah.
Nice. There are a couple biblical allusions strewn throughout the film. Agent Smith's car has the license plate IS 5416, referring to Isaiah 54:16, which reads, "Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that
You can
bringeth."
just stop there. Smith, get it?
That's good. That's good. That was good.
Yeah.
And the Nebuchadnezzar's core etching Mark III number 11 model is a possible reference to Mark III 11, which reads, "And whoever those possessed by evil spirits caught sight of him, they would fall down in front of him, shrieking, 'You are the Son of God.'"
Which they did.
My Catholic priest ancestors are very proud of me right now. Most of the oh no, I don't like needles. Most of the acupuncture needles in Neo's body are stuck in a prosthetic, that's good, that covers Keanu's chest, except for the needles in his ears, which were inserted by an on-set acupuncturist. Oh, I can't. Have you ever had acupuncture done?
Yeah, all the time. It's great.
But it's got needles.
Yeah.
Why is it great?
I don't know. It's good for muscle stuff. I use it for my back and neck situation.
Oh, it's hurting my back and neck because I'm getting tense just thinking about it. Moving on. The horrifying scene in which Neo's mouth melts shut. That was an intentional homage to the sci-fi novel I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Yeah, that's
truly one of the greatest titles of all time. Harlan Ellison is one of those deeply unsung heroes who's like one of the most quietly influential sci-fi authors of all time. He wrote Demon with a Glass Hand, which is an episode of The Outer Limits. That was later found to be so similar to the Terminator that newer cuts of the original film feature with the credit that says like grateful acknowledgement to the works of Harlan Ellison or something.
Wow. I love that you could just rattle the stuff off. I can only do that with like the Titanic and the Beatles.
Well, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is one of the more famous ones. Although hilariously enough, Harlan Ellison wrote himself, "Terminator was not stolen from Demon with a Glass Hand. It was a ripoff of my other Outer Limits script, Soldier."
And finally, our last lightning round fun fact. The cascading green code used to render the Matrix in the real world was a custom typeface designed by Simon Whiteley that included Japanese characters, Arabic numerals, and Western Latin letters. In a 2017 interview at CNET, he attributed the design to his wife, who's from Japan, saying, "I like to tell everybody that the Matrix code is made out of Japanese sushi recipes." I think I read that before and I thought he was serious, but I'm guessing he's kidding.
Who's to say?
Oh, right, yeah.
Filming on The Matrix ended and post-production began in October of 1998. The Wachowskis stayed in Australia until November and continued editing the film until shortly before its release. Warner Brothers was nervous after the aforementioned and similar Dark City kind of flopped at the box office, and so they decided to bet big on ads. They took out a 1999 Super Bowl ad for the movie. But interestingly, they were kind of hands-off at this point. The editor, Zach Steinberg, told Wired that they had a great test meeting and then a test screening, and they were in a meeting with the Warner's co-chairs, Bob Daly and Terry Semel, and Terry said, "We love this movie. Their only note to us was to take 5 to 10 minutes out. We ended up taking 5.5 minutes out, and they never even looked at that final cut." Hilarious. They needn't have worried. The Matrix opened in theaters in the United States on March 31st, 1999 to widespread acclaim and went on to gross $460 million on its $63 million budget, becoming the highest grossing Warner Brothers film of 1999 and the fourth highest grossing film of that year. It's funny because they were a little scared of putting it up against Phantom Menace, which came out in May of that year.
Oh, wow.
And then The Mummy also came out right around that time. It was like a big kind of sneak hit, sneak blockbuster. What a great couple of months for blockbusters, man.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, also being a David Cronenberg nerd, I have to note this. David Cronenberg's Existenz, with a Z, was released shortly after The Matrix and starred Jennifer Jason Leigh as a celebrity video game designer whose creation drops players into a fake but believable world, which is the exact setup for Keanu Reeves' character in the fourth Matrix film. They make him a game designer whose creation is widely celebrated as immersive. Starting to wonder if they just keep tabs on everything and steal it. Nah. Taking that back. Just under a month after The Matrix came out, though, the Columbine massacre pulled the movie into a darker area of the discourse. The resemblance between the film's fetishization of firearms and the wardrobe's resemblance to the trench coats worn by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. The overall fetishization of gunplay in the movie did little help, but in the end, Matrix just kind of steamrolled past all of that. Like the brief blip when video games and violent movies were such a hot talking point. I remember this, and it was quickly eclipsed by like Marilyn Manson. Don't you? And like Eminem. I remember that music being so much of a bigger deal than movies.
Oh, big time, yeah.
What a stupid country. The Matrix received nominations at the 72nd Academy Awards for Best Visual Effects, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, and Best Sound Editing, and it won all 4 categories. I think it's one of the only cases in which a film won all of the categories in which it was nominated and also wasn't nominated for any of the big 4.
Oh,
or whatever.
wow.
In 2009, The Matrix was ranked 39th on Empire magazine's reader, actor, and critic voted list of the 500 greatest movies of all time. Voted as the 4th best science fiction film in the 2011 list. Best of film, based on a poll conducted by ABC and People magazine. And it must be said that in 2012, The Matrix was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress for being, quote, culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant.
2012, I was 13 years. What took him so long?
I know. It should have been canonized upon its release.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the runaway success of the film changed everyone's life, or at least the life of everyone involved in it. Keanu Reeves became a full-on action star / you say the maybe most dangerous man in Hollywood that he was always meant to be. Why was he the most dangerous man in Hollywood?
Well, because after learning all this kung fu stuff, for the John Wick movies, he also learned like CQC, which is like the military close quarter combat stuff that has elements of like Krav Maga and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So he learned all that stuff for John Wick, and then he also just added firearms training to his like. Don't you remember when they talked about the making of John Wick, how he became like an expert marksman with like everything from pistols to shotguns to like long rifles because he had to do it all in the movie and was so committed to it that he became like a legitimately dangerous gun user. I just love the fact that he's like the most chill dude of all time. Yeah. He's like, I've also mastered several arts of killing.
So that's Keanu.
And then swords too, because he did a very maligned flop of a samurai movie that he did all in its original Japanese for some reason, because among his heritages is Japanese, I think, but he wanted to do the whole movie in Japanese, and so presumably he's also really good with the sword.
Has he done like non-action, like has he done like any rom-coms or anything, or is he purely an action guy these days?
The Lake House in 1999, I think he did.
He was in Thumbsucker, which I remember seeing in theaters for some reason.
Replacements was his next big one after it.
Oh, man. With Gene Hackman, right?
That's correct.
Hell yeah. Anyway, that's Keanu Reeves.
Oh, and Constantine. God, Constantine whips. Also, in 2005, he did Scanner Darkly, which is probably the best, to my mind, Philip K. Dick adaptation that's ever gone out on screen, and another movie that makes tremendous use of his dialed-in kind of blank affect.
Yeah.
Everyone go check out Scanner Darkly. It rules.
I remember seeing that in theaters, too. Wow,
so did I, yeah.
Big Keanu Reeves high school movie experience. Never thought about that.
I'm so glad for you.
Yeah. So that's Keanu Reeves. The Wachowskis became A-listers upon the release of The Matrix. Carrie-Anne Moss stopped being able to wear sunglasses outside because she was recognized instantly in them, which is the opposite of every other celebrity who wears sunglasses to hide. I love that.
I mean, until she grew her hair out, she just had a tremendously recognizable face and head. When you add sunglasses to it, people just started breaking their necks looking at her in the public, I guess.
Between The Matrix and Rush Hour the previous year, 1998, Hollywood quickly took notice of how much money there was to be made via Hong Kong. And one of the most direct beneficiaries of this was the runaway success of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which made U.S. stars out of longtime Hong Kong legends like Chow Yun-fat and Michelle Yeoh and gave U.S. audiences its first big exposure to the historical epic genre the film belongs to, called wuxia. You didn't think I was going
Nailed
to
it.
pronounce that right.
You nailed that, dude.
I've heard you say it enough times. See, you teach me. You teach me. Bullet time quickly infiltrated other films and even video games. The game Max Payne, I remember Max Payne, literally named one of its central mechanics bullet time, though the game had been in development more or less at the same time as The Matrix, so it wasn't a complete steal.
Do you remember the XFL?
Oh my God, yeah, wow.
The XFL used a rudimentary form of bullet time for its replays. They used the same still camera rotating. They had cameras. I think one of their big quote unquote innovations that actually affected the NFL was that they allowed cameras lower and over the field so that you could get a closer look at stuff. And I distinctly remember watching one of those XFL games and seeing the bullet time rotating camera thing.
That's really funny. I'd do an episode of the XFL. What the hell happened with that?
Oh yeah, dude, it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
I think a bunch of those guys went to the NFL and a bunch of them became professional wrestlers. And Vince McMahon is a monster.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Matrix also blew up the whole sort of techno-adjacent hacker culture. As you say, suddenly people wearing PVC to do drugs in Berlin warehouse parties were seen as cool as hell. We don't have enough time to get remotely into the expanded universe of The Matrix, which involves comic books, video games, the Animatrix, which made the ties to Japanese animation explicit by having various prominent animators render in-universe stories into an anthology. And that's not even touching on the 3 sequels.
Which I will not.
No.
Reloaded has some killer fight scenes. Revolutions is... That was a guy outside, but I share his sentiment.
Let's say, listeners, Heigl has been quiet for about 25 seconds now that I edited down.
I'm staring off into middle distance.
As early as 2000, colleges began offering introductory philosophy courses tied to this movie. And as the 2005 book Philosophers Explore the Matrix puts it, by the end of 1999, when nearly every undergraduate-aged American had seen The Matrix, philosophy professors rejoiced. Here was a deceptive visual reality scenario burned into our collective cinematic imagination. No more explaining how the evil demon causes my sensory experience. No more explaining how the scientist built the experience machine. Now we could just say, it's like in The Matrix. But
That's great.
Yeah. Wow, between this and Groundhog Day, we're really hitting the philosophy.
Good for us.
Wow, it's almost as if we're going through stuff and trying to figure things out.
Next up, Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea.
But as with any world-conquering success, the naysayers came out in force. Allegations of plagiarism were leveled at the Wachowskis for lifting bits and pieces of The Matrix from varying sources. One of the most prominent critics was comic book legend Grant Morrison, whose work had been tackling many of the themes of The Matrix for years. For instance, in a 1992 issue of Doom Patrol written by Morrison, the self-explanatory robot man's consciousness becomes stuck in an artificial reality called the Data Matrix.
I'm not generally one to add fuel to the Matrix, to the Wachowskis or plagiarists fire, but when you see it in tota, you're like, all right. Like between this and Dark City and all this other stuff, a case could be made. Especially, I didn't show you any art of the Invisibles, where one of the guys looks exactly like Lawrence Fishburne.
This robot man, whose consciousness has become infused in the Data Matrix, goes on a journey to realize he is in a simulation before finding a way to ascend to reality. Grant Morrison, he wasn't happy about this. He was also mad that many of the visual touchstones of The Invisibles, as you mentioned, probably his most famous work, depicted the same leather-clad goth and raver subcultures that The Matrix rated for its style. And there's also a scene in The Invisibles where a guy has to jump off a skyscraper as an initiation, much like Neo does. The entire premise of The Invisibles, a secret group of rebels roaming multiple planes of reality, preaching that the real world's being controlled by inhuman masters and imploring the audience to wake up, is, as you note, pretty dead on as far as comparisons to The Matrix go. The protagonist of The Invisibles is supposed to be a reincarnation of the Buddha, and is even referred to as the One. So, Yeah, it's all pretty damning.
It really was a banner era for white people stealing from anime. One of the most famous things from this time is Requiem for a Dream, and which
Oh.
Darren Aronofsky wanted to include a shot that was basically a recreation of a frame from a Japanese animated film called Perfect Blue, and he simply bought the rights to the film or wrote them into the budget or whatever, just so he could get away with it. Very funny stuff.
Grant Morrison, the author of The Invisibles and Doom Patrol, those comic books that we'll say most likely inspired The Matrix, has spoken about this a few times. In one extensive interview for the book Anarchy for the Masses, a disinformation guide to The Invisibles, he talked about seeing his ideas appear in the mainstream. He said, "Suddenly I felt my territory was invaded. That was stuff nobody had ever been doing in comic books or in pop culture. The Invisibles was on the set of The Matrix. People who were there have told me the Wachowskis are comic fans. They were Vertigo, the imprint that published The Invisibles, fans in particular. The Wachowskis apparently have not commented publicly about this aspect of their work, which speaks volumes."
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just that they were basically recluses, which is for good reason, as we'll get into later, because the press were awful to them. But yeah, they just didn't do interviews, a lot of interviews, and basically just lived quietly in Chicago. The funniest thing that comes up when you talk about alleged cases of plagiarism in The Matrix is the weird legend of Sophia Stewart. She is a still living writer who, if you believe, won a judgment against the Wachowskis for stealing part of her screenplay treatment, The Third Eye. In a 2003 lawsuit, Stewart named both the original Terminator and The Matrix as stolen from her treatment, which was copyrighted in 1983. She supposedly answered a magazine ad in 1986 that said the Wachowskis were soliciting science fiction stories to be made into a comic book. She also further alleged that her 6-page treatment had been sent to Fox as early as 1981, although they didn't get around to rejecting it until 1985. Stewart failed to show up for her court date, and the lawsuit was dismissed. But the story basically went wide when this is so funny. I'm going to have a hard time reading it. The story went wide on the internet when an October 2004 article by the Salt Lake Community College Globe titled "Mother of the Matrix Victorious" mistakenly said that Stewart would recover the damages she sought from the alleged plagiarism, receiving, quote, "one of the biggest payoffs in the history of Hollywood's, as the gross receipts of both films and their sequels total over $2.5 billion. The article, as you may expect, was later found to be riddled with errors, as the student reporter had mistaken Stewart's successful counter of an early dismissal motion as her winning the entire case. The Salt Lake Community College Globe issued a correction and regretted the error.
Yeah.
But the original story had already been picked up by the wider internet and could not be stopped. Stewart is hilariously still online. Her Twitter bio reads, "I am the creator owner of the Matrix and Terminator films, the official owner of both franchises as per adjudicated in the Utah federal courts 9/25/2014. And she maintains the site truthaboutmatrix.com to continue to make her case."
You should make that your Twitter bio.
Truthaboutmatrix.com. Oh, the official owner. Yeah. Yes. I haven't really made this a bit yet, but I said I was going to start saying I did an uncredited rewrite on everything. While we're talking about courts, though, we might as well segue into something that also popped up in my research. The Matrix defense, which has become a form of insanity plea used several times in criminal cases. Defendants justify their actions by saying that they believed at the time of committing their crimes that they were plugged into the Matrix. Perhaps most shockingly, it has worked. Tonda Lynn Ansley of Hamilton, Ohio, was found not guilty by reason of insanity using this defense after shooting her landlady in the head in July of 2002. Vadim Misiges of San Francisco offered a Matrix explanation to police after chopping up his landlady and was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial. And it was the defense strategy of Joshua Cook's lawyer in his 2003 trial for the murder of his adoptive parents before he opted to plead guilty.
So that's all a bummer. And it gets worse because the darker elements of the Matrix became even more widespread. One of the biggest and most tragic legacies of the Matrix stems from the scene where Morpheus offers Neo a choice to return to his regular life or awaken in the real world, visualizing the decision as red and blue pills. The term was politicized fairly quickly, with its first use popping up in the 2006 essay The Red Pill by University of Colorado sociology professor Kathleen J. Tierney, in which she implored readers to, quote, take the red pill and realize that, quote, post September 11th policies and plans have actually made the nation more vulnerable, both to natural disasters and to future terrorist attacks.
And they
This
have.
was, and yeah, this
She was
in-
right to say it.
This was in the context of the botched response to Hurricane Katrina. A year later, in 2007, the blogger Curtis Yarvin used the phrase in a post written under the pseudonym Mencius Moldbug titled The Case Against Democracy 10 Red Pills.
This stupid country.
The term began to metastasize online in the early 2010s with anti-feminists or men's rights activists referring to their views as, quote, the red pill, which the subreddit The Red Pill, founded in 2012, defines as, quote, the recognition and awareness of the way that feminism, feminists, and their white knight enablers affect society. Given that genesis, it's not difficult to see how the term began to slant more right, as you say, with a conspiracy forward YouTube account called James Red Pills America, discussing a, quote, prefabricated world controlled by a select few seemingly all-powerful forces like the banksters, the Rothschilds, and George Soros. A 2016 documentary titled The Red Pill about the men's rights movements was released, and Candace Owens created the anti-Democrat channel Red Pill Black with the intent of leading Black Americans away from the Democratic Party. But wait, there's more.
Yeah. In the end, the color of the pill doesn't matter. As you mentioned in our intro, the suffix pilled is passed around online, referring to all different worldviews. Black pill for nihilism, green pilled for the belief and or fear that reptilian aliens are enforcing a new world order. Most hilariously, back in the 90s, prescription estrogen was in fact a shade of red. The 0.625 milligram Premarin tablet was a sort of dark maroon. Currently, though, the most common form of orally administered prescription estrogen today is a blue 2 milligram estradiol pill, supplied by the Israeli pharmaceutical company Teva. Make of all that what you will. This whole thing, though, is probably the darkest aspect to the Matrix, and one of the gross kind of unintended side effects of its legacy. Without necessarily meaning to, the Wachowskis created a convenient shorthand to graft onto America's extant distrust of authority and or reason. Writing for Vulture in 2019, Mark Harris extrapolated on that better than I could. Today, The Matrix is less of a touchstone than something that's now so deeply threaded into the way we think and talk that it can sometimes feel invisible. Its loudest manifestations are also the most malignant. The clown in hell, mad prophet fulminations of Alex Jones's InfoWars, Pizzagate, QAnon, and the anti-Semitic mutterings about lizard people. The idea that reality is just a pane of glass concealing the truth, that the only way to reach that is to pick up a rock and throw it. Later on, he continues, the Matrix did not offer its disciples the joy of discovering a new reality, but rather the empowerment of nullification, of casting off whatever temporal, physical, practical, or apparent reality doesn't suit you. The film gives everyone the authority to say, this isn't happening. That's all kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Maybe the most fitting thing about all of these interpretations, if you will, is that the quote that sets off Morpheus's speech in the film, "What if I told you?" is never actually spoken in any of the movies. It's a total Mandela effect situation.
Whoa.
The closest thing he actually comes up with at one point is, "Do you want to know what it is?" Yeah. What if I told you? Not an actual line in any of the Matrix movies.
That's even scarier. All of this is scary. I don't
Yeah,
like
it's horrifying.
This. Let's move on.
It'll get worse before it gets better, and then worse again.
Well, here, we're going to end on a more positive note, which is The Matrix legacy as a transgender text. This was present from day one. One of the most common pieces of lore about the film was that the character of Switch was supposed to be portrayed as having different genders in the real world and the world of The Matrix. Hence her dying line, "Not like this," which suddenly has an extra punch to it, given this reading. Keanu Reeves told Entertainment Weekly in an interview for this most recent movie, there was an early draft of the original Matrix script where the Matrix avatar would be a different sex than the Zion reality. I think the studio wasn't ready for that version, he added. This subtext was made pretty textual in 2012 when Lana Wachowski publicly came out as a trans woman while doing press for the film Cloud Atlas, and her sister Lily followed suit in 2016. This was all preceded by a lot of nasty gossip about the Wachowskis' personal life. The tabloids had a field day when dominatrix Ilsa Stritch, whose real name is Karen Winslow, accompanied Lana to the Matrix Reloaded premiere. This got messier when Jake Miller, Winslow's estranged husband, popped up in the London tabloids to explain that Lana had stolen his wife after the two met in Winslow's dungeon. Miller is a trans man who's better known these days as Buck Angel. Miller essentially outed Lana, claiming in the tabloids, who'd paid for his story, that Lana was taking female hormones to prepare for a gender transition. Since then, the Wachowskis have become much more vocal about The Matrix's roots in the trans experience. Lily told the website Them, The Matrix is a trans allegory in that it was written by two closeted trans women. And so all of the things that are in it are super duper trans. With all the decisions we made with that film, there's just this burbling transness simmering below everything. It's not like these were conscious decisions, but more like we're finding our way instinctively as these two closeted trans women. When people say, oh, it's a trans allegory, it's like, yeah, it is, but we weren't like, hey, let's write a trans allegory. That's not how it started. We were like, hey, let's write this action film. And then we got our trans all over it. And then we got our trans all over it. I don't know how to put the emphasis on that phrase, but the Wachowskis would go on to create Sense8, a sci-fi series featuring trans woman Nomi Marks. Lana Wachowski told The New Yorker in 2012 how much she was struggling with her gender identity around the time of the second and third Matrix films. She said, for years, I couldn't even say the words transgendered or transsexual. When I began to admit it to myself, I knew I would eventually have to tell my parents and my brother and my sisters. This fact would inject such terror into me that I couldn't sleep for days. And because the British tabloids are the worst, hands down, Lily was moved to make a public statement in 2016 when the Daily Mail turned up at her door pressing the issue. The statement to the Windy City Times read in part, I just needed some time to get my head right, to feel comfortable. But apparently I don't get to decide this. So that's horrible. Emily Vanderwolf, a critic who's written eloquently about trans themes in The Matrix, talked to NPR about the cognitive dissonance of the film's adoption by the alt-right and its importance to the trans community. She says, if you're a trans person, there's sort of this idea that you're living in a muffling cocoon that's keeping you from seeing the reality of yourself. And that cocoon, to some degree, is the idea of fixed gender identity, which is one that society is built atop. And to be trans, you have to sort of assail that idea. And in the process of doing so, you may question other things about reality. But she also sees the universality of the film as a feature, not a bug. Quote, it does weirdly speak to the movie's cultural ubiquity, to this movie's ability to speak to all sorts of people in a similar way, but to different ends, that I think often marks the most important and greatest movies ever made. Well said. That's very true.
I also want to throw this out. We're two cishet white guys.
Yes.
So we're quoting a lot.
Yeah.
Van der Werf in another piece for Vox identified what me personally, the aforementioned
Alex Heigl,
cishet white guy, is the most terrifying aspect of the Matrix. The movie, as we mentioned earlier, was released at a time when Hollywood was just beginning to understand and incorporate the internet. Sandra Bullock's The Net was released the same year. Keanu put out Johnny Mnemonic. I think Hackers came out around the same time.
Yeah.
Van der Werf writes, the movie's coolest trick is the way it inverts what you'd expect from a movie released in 1999 by making the internet the poisonous capitalist space that keeps people emotionally numb. The internet becoming a poisonous capitalist faux utopia is perhaps The Matrix's most accidentally accurate prediction. We didn't waited this long to get to this point, but the film's central premise of machines converting humans into docile power sources has been well debunked. Robert Hurt, a Caltech-based visualization scientist who has worked on many NASA projects, including the Spitzer Space Telescope, told Esquire, it happens to be my least favorite plot device in a sci-fi movie in decades. Humans consume quite a lot of high-energy products, like food and oxygen, and the only thing that they produce that could count as energy would be basically heat. But if you took all the food, just burned it, you'd get way more heat out of that. You can chalk it up to thermodynamics and entropy. Some systems just don't process efficiently, and basically you can count on getting less energy out than you put in. But in a truly cosmically horrifying and hilarious turn of events, that's exactly what happened, but with a different and more mundane slant. The utopian promise of the internet as a place where you could become your truest self has dissolved into a series of walled gardens controlled by the greediest, most soulless human beings possible. Rather than your physical energy, the internet and social media simply take your time, mental health, and productivity and turn it into sweet, monetizable data. Every fleece-vested Palo Alto, blue checkmark dork hawking AI as a revolutionary tool is a miniature Agent Smith, seeking a way to wring every cent they can out of the human experience without getting too much of the stink on them. We didn't need the machines to do this. We just needed venture capitalists. The ultimate lesson of the Matrix and the internet, at least for the users who make up the platforms being choked to death by the techno-capitalist set, could really still just boil down to, you can count on getting less energy out than you put in. That does not, however, hold true for iHeartMedia's fine slate of podcast offerings, which you can find on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify,
and wherever
now
you get
on
your
YouTube.
favorite shows. And now on YouTube, that's right. Check us out on YouTube, folks.
Yeah. Gonna walk all that back and say, listen to us more.
And our new partnership with People Magazine and People.com.
Admittedly, this is just my take. As a musician and writer, I have a hard time seeing the internet and social media as anything but damaging. But if you want the most positive slant, you can keep taking it back to what Lana and Lily originally got out of it, which was an allegory for becoming the person that they always wanted to be all along. And they just happened to make one of the greatest movies of all time out of it. I'm Alex Heigl. This has been Too Much Information. Thanks for listening. And you're Jordan Runtagh.
That's right.
We'll see you next time.
And there is no spoon. Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl,
with original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.